I pulled into the gravel parking lot and cut the engine, already second-guessing this decision. The job listing had been vague. Night shift at a fast food restaurant, decent pay, immediate hiring. What it hadn't mentioned was that the place sat in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Highway 50 went on forever in both directions across the Nevada desert. No gas stations, no truck stops, no other buildings of any kind. Just sand, scrub brush, and this single restaurant sitting beside the asphalt like someone had forgotten about it. The faded sign above the entrance read Desert Oasis Diner in letters that were probably bright red a long time ago. My car door creaked as I stepped out into the dry heat. Even though the sun was starting to drop toward the horizon, the air still felt like standing too close to an oven. I grabbed my jacket from the passenger seat. Nights in the desert could turn cold fast, and walked toward the building. The glass door was clean enough, but everything else looked like it had been frozen in time somewhere around 1985. Orange vinyl booths lined the windows, their surfaces cracked and patched with duct tape. The floor tiles were that industrial beige that was supposed to hide dirt but mostly just looked tired. Behind the counter, I could see into a kitchen that featured equipment I recognized from old movies. The kind of fryer that probably took 20 minutes to heat up, and a grill with actual knobs instead of digital controls. A bell above the door rang when I walked in. The man behind the counter looked up from a clipboard he'd been writing on. His uniform was clean and pressed, name tag reading Ryan Mitchell, manager, in block letters. "You must be Michael Anderson," he said, setting down his pen. His voice carried the kind of authority that came naturally, not the forced kind some managers tried to project. "That's right. Thanks for hiring me on such short notice." Ryan studied my face for a moment, the way someone might look at a used car they were considering buying. Not unfriendly exactly, but evaluating. "How desperate are you for this job?" The question caught me off guard. Most interviews ended with small talk about when I could start, not philosophical discussions about my financial situation. "Pretty desperate, honestly. I've been out of work for 4 months. He nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Good. Desperate employees follow instructions. Comfortable employees get creative, and creative gets people hurt around here." The word hurt felt awkward in a conversation about flipping burgers and taking orders. Ryan reached under the counter and pulled out a single sheet of white paper. "These are the rules," he said, sliding it across to me. "Read them carefully. Memorize them. Follow them exactly." I picked up the paper and looked down at 5 numbered items, typed in simple black text. 1. If a customer wearing a blue baseball cap orders food, offer them a free drink. If they accept, proceed normally. If they decline, immediately exit through the front door and call me. 2. If any customer asks for the special, tell them we're out of stock. If they insist, charge them exactly $6.66 and retrieve the sealed box from the storage room. Do not open the box. Do not ask what's inside. 3. If 2 customers enter together and their combined ages appear to equal exactly 100 years, call me immediately. Do not serve them. 4. If any employee exits the walk-in freezer after 2 a.m., immediately ask them what the temperature reading was inside. If they say anything other than -2 degrees, run to your car and drive away. Call me once you're safe. 5. No one is permitted to enter through the back door between midnight and 6 a.m. If someone attempts to do so, do not let them in, regardless of who they claim to be. I read through the list twice, certain I was missing some kind of joke or context that would make these rules make sense. Blue baseball caps. Something called the special that cost exactly $6.66. Customers whose ages added up to 100. Temperature readings in the freezer. "This is specific," I said finally. "Every word of it." Ryan leaned forward slightly, his expression completely serious. "I need you to understand something, Michael. These aren't suggestions. They're not guidelines you can interpret or modify based on the situation. They are survival instructions." The word survival hit me like cold water. I looked around the empty restaurant. taking in the worn booths and outdated equipment, trying to figure out what kind of danger could possibly exist in a place that served hamburgers and fries to travelers on a lonely stretch of highway. What happens if I don't follow them? People die, Ryan said simply. Usually the employee who breaks the rule, but sometimes others too. I've had to hire 14 people in the past 2 years. 14 people. I wanted to ask what happened to them, but something in Ryan's expression suggested I wasn't ready for that answer. Maybe I'd never be ready for it. The smart thing would have been to thank him for his time and walk away. Normal restaurants didn't hand out lists of bizarre rules that sounded like they belonged in a horror movie. Normal managers didn't talk about survival instructions and employee deaths with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. But my bank account was down to $300. My rent was due in 6 days. The unemployment office had been less helpful than a broken GPS, and every other job application I'd submitted just got me automated rejection emails. The pay is what you advertised, I asked. $22 an hour to start. $25 after the first month if you're still here. Plus health insurance and overtime pay for anything over 40 hours a week. $22 an hour was more than I'd made at my last job, and that had required a college degree and 3 years of experience. The money alone would solve most of my immediate problems. The fact that it came with a set of rules that sounded like they'd been written by someone having a fever dream was apparently the trade-off. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket pocket. When do I start? Tonight, your shift begins at 10 o'clock and runs until 6 in the morning. You'll be working with Jack Peterson. He's been here for over 2 years, so he knows the procedures inside and out. Ryan paused, watching my face carefully. You sure about this? I'm sure. He reached under the counter again and pulled out a uniform shirt in my size, along with a name tag that simply read, Mike. How he'd known my size or that I preferred Mike to Michael, I didn't know, but I was starting to suspect that very little happened at this place without Ryan being aware of it. Take the afternoon to memorize those rules, he said. All 5 of them, word for word. When you come back tonight, I'll assume you know them perfectly, and so will Jack. Questions? I had about 100 questions, starting with why a fast food restaurant needed rules about freezer temperatures and ending with what exactly had happened to those 14 previous employees. But looking at Ryan's expression, I could tell this wasn't the time for curiosity. No questions. Good. I'll see you at 10. I walked back to my car with the uniform and name tag in one hand and the folded paper in my jacket pocket. The desert stretched out around me in all directions, empty and vast. Somewhere out there, normal people were working normal jobs with normal rules about things like washing hands and not spitting in the food. But normal jobs weren't hiring people like me, people with gaps in their employment history and references who'd stopped returning phone calls. Normal jobs didn't pay $22 an hour to start, and they definitely didn't come with health insurance. I started the engine and pulled back onto Highway 50, already working on memorizing the 5 rules. Whatever I'd just signed up for, I was committed now. Blue baseball caps, temperature readings, and sealed boxes that cost exactly $6.66. At least it wouldn't be boring. I pulled back into the gravel parking lot at 5 minutes to 10, my hands a bit sweaty on the steering wheel. The restaurant looked different at night, more isolated if that was even possible. The fluorescent lights inside made bright rectangles across the empty dining area, and beyond that pool of light, the desert went on into complete darkness. The rules I had to remember kept running through my head for hours. Blue baseball cap, free drink. The special $6.66 sealed box. Combined ages of 100. Freezer temperature, -2 degrees. Back door locked from midnight to 6. I grabbed my uniform shirt and walked toward the entrance, wondering if Ryan would be there for my first night. The bell jingled as I pushed through the door, and I immediately saw I wouldn't be working alone. A man stood behind the counter, organizing condiment packets into neat rows. Medium height, skinny, with the kind of tired eyes that came from working too many late shifts. His uniform was slightly wrinkled but clean, and his name tag read, Jack Peterson. When he looked up, his smile seemed real enough, though there was something cautious about the way he looked at me. "You must be the new guy," he said, straightening up. "Mike, right?" "That's right. Jack? Been here just over 2 years now." He gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "Come on, let me show you the setup before we get busy." I followed him behind the counter, noting how he moved with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. The kitchen was small but organized, with prep stations that looked like they'd been maintained by people who actually cared about keeping things functional. "Ryan said you'd been briefed on the procedures," Jack said, pulling a fresh apron from a hook near the grill. "The rules. I memorized them this afternoon." Jack paused while tying his apron strings and looked right at me. "Good, because around here those aren't suggestions or company policies you can bend when it's convenient. They're survival instructions, and I mean that literally." He sounded like he knew from experience. I thought about Ryan's comment about hiring 14 people in 2 years and wondered how many of those Jack had seen come and go. "Has anyone ever—" I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the question. "Broken the rules?" Jack's expression went flat. "Yeah, a few times. It never ended well for anyone involved." He moved to the cash register and began showing me the basic operations: how to ring up orders, process payments, manage the limited menu options. Normal restaurant stuff that felt bizarrely ordinary given the conversation we'd just had. "The dinner rush is pretty much over by the time our shift starts," he explained, pointing toward the nearly empty dining area. "Most of our customers between 10 and 6 are travelers, truckers mostly, but sometimes other folks passing through. You never know who's going to walk through that door." The way he emphasized the last sentence made me look toward the entrance, half expecting someone unusual to appear on cue. The parking lot remained empty except for our cars and a single semi-truck that had pulled in while I was getting oriented. Jack noticed my glance. Trucker probably wants coffee and maybe something to eat, pretty standard for this time of night. But as we watched, the truck driver didn't come to our door. He just got back in his truck and drove away. We could hear the diesel engines getting quieter as he left. "Or not," Jack said with a shrug. "Happens sometimes. They stop, change their minds, keep moving." 20 minutes later, I was starting to think my first night would be uneventful. Jack had walked me through the basic cleaning procedures, shown me where supplies were stored, and explained the cash handling protocols. Everything felt remarkably normal for a job that came with rules about freezer temperatures and sealed boxes. Then the bell above the front door jingled. A middle-aged man walked in, average height and build, wearing jeans and a blue baseball cap. He came to the counter looking like someone who'd been driving for hours and needed food and caffeine to keep going. My stomach tightened as I recognized the first rules trigger: blue baseball cap. I looked at Jack, who gave me the slightest nod, confirming that I'd spotted the situation correctly. "Evening," the man said, studying the menu board behind us. "I'll take a cheeseburger, fries, and a coffee." "Sure thing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Would you like a free drink to go with that? Soda, juice, whatever you prefer?" The man looked at me for a moment, and I felt a weird chill. His face was completely blank, like he was looking through me rather than at me. No recognition, no gratitude for the offer. No normal human reaction at all. "Free drink sounds good," he said finally. "Coke." I rang up his order, adding the Coke at no charge, and took his payment. Jack had already started preparing the burger, working quickly while keeping an eye on our customer. The man found a booth by the window and sat down, his movements oddly mechanical. "Food'll be ready in just a few minutes," I called out. He didn't respond or acknowledge that he'd heard me. Just sat there staring out the window at the empty parking lot with the same blank expression. Jack slid the completed order across the prep counter, and I carried it to the customer's table. Up close, that vacant stare was even more unsettling. He thanked me in a flat voice and began eating with the same mechanical precision, never once glancing up from his food. Back behind the counter, Jack leaned close and spoke quietly. "You handled that exactly right. Offer accepted. Proceed normally." What would have happened if he'd declined the drink? You would have walked out that front door immediately and called Ryan. No questions, no delays, no trying to figure out why. Jack's expression was serious, and you would have been very glad you followed that rule. The customer finished his meal in silence, left exact change plus a small tip on the table, and walked out without saying another word. Through the window, I watched him drive away in a sedan that I hadn't noticed arriving. "First test passed," Jack said, beginning to clean the grill. "Not bad for your first night." But the encounter left me feeling weird. The customer's behavior wasn't threatening exactly, just wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Like watching someone try to act normal but not quite pulling it off. An hour later, the second test came in. This time, it was a trucker, exactly the kind of customer Jack had talked about as typical for our late-night crowd. Big guy, probably in his 50s, with the rough look of someone who spent most of his life on the road. He came up to the counter walking like he knew exactly what he wanted. "What can I get you?" I asked. "I'll take the special," he said without hesitation. My heart rate kicked up immediately. Rule number 2. I'd hoped this one wouldn't come up on my first night, but Jack was watching from the grill station, and I knew I couldn't mess this up. "Sorry, we're out of stock on that tonight," I replied. The trucker's expression didn't change. "Nah, you got it. I know you got it. I'll pay whatever it costs." This was the moment the rule had prepared me for. The customer insisting after being told we were out. I looked at Jack, who gave me another slight nod. "The special runs $6.66, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. The trucker pulled out a 20 and laid it on the counter. "That'll work." I rang him up and gave him his change. My hands were a bit shaky as I handed him the receipt. "I'll need to get that from the back for you. Just give me a minute." Jack jerked his head toward the storage room. "Back there, top shelf on the left. You'll see it." I walked through the kitchen into the storage area, looking around the shelves until I found what had to be the item. A plain cardboard box about the size of a shoebox, sealed with packing tape. No labels, no markings of any kind. When I picked it up, something inside moved around a little. Every instinct I had screamed at me to open it, to peek inside and see what someone would pay $6.66 for in the middle of the Nevada desert. But the rule had been specific. Do not open the box. I carried it back to the counter where the trucker waited patiently. He took the box without comment, tucked it under his arm, and headed for the door. "Have a good night," I called after him. He didn't respond, and moments later I heard his truck engine starting up outside. Jack finished wiping down the counter and looked at me with approval. 2 for 2. Most new people struggle with that second one. What was in the box? Better that you don't know. Better that you never know. Jack's tone was final. The rule exists for a reason, and part of that reason is keeping certain information away from people who aren't equipped to handle it. I wanted to press the issue, but something in his expression warned me off. Instead, I focused on cleaning the counter and trying to process what had just happened. 2 customers, 2 rules triggered, 2 situations that felt fundamentally wrong even though I'd handled them correctly. The trucker's casual confidence when he'd insisted we had the special. The blank stare of the man in the blue baseball cap. The way both interactions followed the rules exactly, like following a script written for a play I didn't understand. "How often do these things happen?" I asked. Jack considered the question while organizing receipt paper behind the register. "Often enough that you need to stay sharp, not so often that you get comfortable. The rules wouldn't exist if we didn't need them." The dark night sky seemed to surround the restaurant windows. Now that emptiness felt less like being alone, and more like a gap where weird stuff could happen without regular people seeing it. My first shift was only a few hours old, and I'd already dealt with 2 situations that proved the rules weren't just Ryan's made-up hazing. They were real, necessary, and the fact that I'd handled them correctly was apparently worth noting. But even with Jack's approval and the relief of getting through both encounters safely, I couldn't stop thinking I'd just seen a hint of something much bigger and weirder than a simple night job at a roadside diner. I still had several hours to go before my shift ended, and who knows what other strange customers might show up at our isolated spot on the highway. I was starting to understand why the position paid $22 an hour and why Ryan had gone through 14 employees in 2 years. Whatever this place really was, it definitely wasn't just a restaurant. The next few hours were pretty quiet. Jack showed me how to clean the fryer properly, walked me through the inventory system, and told me stories about some of the more memorable regular customers who came by during normal hours. Normal customers who wore normal clothes and ordered normal food without triggering any of the 5 rules that had already proven themselves disturbingly accurate. I was starting to feel like maybe the worst was behind me when the bell above the door jingled just after midnight. An elderly man walked in first, moving slowly but steadily with the careful way of walking that showed he'd learned to respect his aging joints. Behind him came a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with the same dark hair and similar facial features. Grandfather and grandson, most likely, though what they were doing on Highway 50 at this hour was anybody's guess. The old man looked around the restaurant like someone who'd seen plenty of roadside diners in his time. His face had deep lines from years spent outdoors, and his clothes were clean but well worn. The boy stayed close to his side, looking around with the curiosity kids show when in new places. They came to the counter together, the man's hand on the boy's shoulder. Normal customers, I told myself. Just 2 people who needed food and maybe directions to wherever they were headed. But something bothered me as I watched them study the menu board. The man looked like he was in his 70s, maybe mid-70s, given the way he moved and the lines around his eyes. The kid was clearly young, probably around 10, like I'd first thought. 70 plus 10, 80, not 100. But what if the man was closer to 80? Or what if the kid was older than he looked? What if I was wrong about their ages by even a few years? Rule number 3 came back to me. If 2 customers enter together and their combined ages appear to equal exactly 100 years, call me immediately. I glanced toward Jack, who was wiping down the grill but keeping an eye on our new customers. He caught my look and raised an eyebrow questioningly. When I held up my phone and pointed toward the back room, he gave me a quick nod. "I'll be right with you folks," I called out to the customers, then stepped into the kitchen area and pulled out my phone. Ryan answered on the first ring, like he'd been expecting my call. "What is it?" "2 customers just came in, an older man and a young boy. I'm not sure about their exact ages, but they might add up to 100. I'll be right there. Do not serve them anything until I arrive." The line went dead. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the counter where the man and boy were still examining their options. "Sorry about that," I said. "My manager will be with you in just a moment to help with your order." The old man nodded pleasantly enough. "No rush, son. We're not in any particular hurry." His voice had a slight Midwest twang, sounding like someone's grandpa. The boy tugged on his sleeve and whispered something I couldn't hear, pointing at one of the menu items. They looked like regular travelers stopping for a late meal, which made my decision to call Ryan feel both necessary and ridiculous. Less than 5 minutes later, headlights lit up the parking lot. Ryan's truck pulled up near the front entrance, and he walked in like he meant business. His face changed when he saw the customers. Not alarmed exactly, but serious enough to make my stomach tighten. He walked toward them carefully. "Good evening," Ryan said, his voice carrying a polite but formal tone I hadn't heard him use before. "I understand you're looking to place an order." The elderly man straightened slightly. "That's right, just wanted some food for the road." Ryan looked at both of them for a moment. The boy had moved slightly behind his grandfather, though whether from shyness or something else I couldn't tell. "I'm afraid we're not able to accommodate you tonight," Ryan said finally. but I'd be happy to direct you to another establishment that can meet your needs." The man's pleasant expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way he held himself. "Is that so? And why might that be?" "House policy," Ryan replied smoothly. "Nothing personal, you understand." For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I could hear the faint sound of the refrigeration units running in the kitchen. Finally, the old man nodded slowly. "I see. Well, we appreciate your honesty." Ryan gestured toward what I suddenly realized was a side door I hadn't noticed during my orientation. It blended so seamlessly with the wall paneling that it might as well have been invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "If you'd follow me, I'll show you the most direct route to where you need to go." The man placed his hand on the boy's shoulder again and followed Ryan toward the hidden exit. Just before they reached it, the boy glanced back at me over his shoulder. For just an instant, his young face looked incredibly sad. The kind of sadness you don't expect to see on a 10-year-old. Then they were gone, the side door closing behind them with barely a sound. Ryan returned alone a few minutes later. He walked to the counter where I stood trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. "You made the right call," he said simply. "Were their ages really 100 combined?" Close enough that it didn't matter. When you're dealing with these situations, uncertainty means you contact me immediately. Better to be wrong and cautious than right and dead. Jack had been listening from the kitchen area, and now he joined us at the counter. Most new people try to be sure before they call. They want to avoid looking stupid or paranoid. That kind of thinking gets people hurt. "What would have happened if I'd served them?" I asked. Ryan and Jack exchanged a look that carried the weight of shared knowledge I wasn't ready for. "Nothing good," Ryan said. "The rules exist because we've learned what happens when they're broken. Every single one of them was written in someone else's blood." The casual way he delivered that statement hit me harder than if he'd shouted it. 14 employees in 2 years. Rules written in blood. This job was clearly about more than just serving food to people on a lonely highway. Ryan checked his watch and went toward the door. "I'll let you get back to your shift. Well done tonight, Michael." After he left, Jack and I stood in silence for several minutes. The restaurant felt weird now after what I'd just seen. The grandfather and grandson who'd triggered one of the 5 survival rules. The side door I'd never noticed before. Ryan showing up so quickly and calmly dealing with whatever threat they'd been. "The isolation isn't just about being in the middle of nowhere, is it?" I said finally. Jack looked toward the windows where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. No other lights visible anywhere, no sign of human presence except for the occasional headlights passing on the highway. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." The empty landscape that had seemed merely inconvenient when I first got here now felt like something totally different. Not just a far-off spot for a restaurant, but a barrier between worlds. A place where weird things could happen without regular people walking into situations they couldn't handle. Where customers whose ages added up to exactly 100 could be quietly taken away through doors that shouldn't exist. Where workers like me could learn to follow rules that kept everyone safe from whatever happened if you broke them. The restaurant being so far from everything suddenly felt a lot more scary than just annoying. The hours between midnight and 2:30 a.m. passed more quietly than I'd expected. Jack showed me how to properly rotate the stock in the walk-in cooler, explained the cleaning schedule for the coffee machines, and walked me through the process for handling end-of-shift paperwork. Normal restaurant tasks that felt almost surreal after everything else that had happened tonight. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jack handled most of the actual cooking while I managed the front counter and learned the cash register system. The few customers who stopped by during those hours were exactly what he'd described. Tired truckers wanting coffee and basic food. Travelers stretching their legs and grabbing snacks before getting back on the road. Nobody wearing blue baseball caps, nobody asking for specials, nobody triggering any of the 5 rules that had already proven themselves disturbingly real. I was starting to think maybe the worst encounters happened earlier in the shift, when people were traveling stranger routes or making more desperate stops. Maybe the deep overnight hours were actually the quiet time, when normal people did normal things and the rules could fade into background caution rather than immediate threat. That comfortable theory lasted until 2:30 a.m. The first sign something was wrong came as a rhythmic banging sound from the back of the restaurant. Not loud enough to be alarming, but persistent enough to be annoying, like someone repeatedly dropping something heavy in the storage area. Jack looked up from wiping down the grill. What the hell? The banging continued, definitely coming from the direction of the walk-in freezer. Jack dropped his cleaning rag and headed toward the sound, with the slightly irritated expression of someone dealing with equipment that had picked an inconvenient time to break down. Probably the compressor acting up again, he said over his shoulder. Thing's been making weird noises all week. I stayed at the front counter, processing the night's receipts while listening to Jack investigate the problem. The banging stopped for a minute, then started again with a different pattern. More random now, like whatever was causing it had moved or gotten knocked loose. The walk-in freezer door opened with its usual heavy thunk. I heard Jack moving around inside, probably checking the temperature controls or looking for whatever was making the noise. The banging stopped completely. Then everything went quiet for several minutes. Too quiet. I put down the receipts and looked toward the back of the restaurant. From my spot behind the counter, I couldn't see the freezer area directly, but the normal sounds of Jack moving around and checking things had stopped completely. "Everything okay back there?" I called out. No response. A few more minutes went by. The silence went on long enough that I started to worry. Jack wasn't the type to ignore questions or leave without saying anything, especially when he was supposed to be showing me the right way to do things. I was about to walk back and check on him when I heard the freezer door close with its thunk. Footsteps came from the kitchen area, and Jack came into view around the corner of the prep station. Something was wrong with how he looked right away. His skin was white, almost gray under the bright lights, and his eyes seemed empty and out of focus, like someone waking up from being knocked out. He walked slowly and carefully, like he had to think hard about each step. "Jack? You all right?" He blinked slowly and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not confused exactly, but distant, like he was seeing me from very far away. "Yeah, fine." His voice sounded flat, lacking the easy warmth he'd shown all night. But more than that, something about his posture seemed off. Jack had moved with confident efficiency since I'd met him, every gesture economical and practiced. Now he stood stiffly, his arms hanging at his sides in a way that looked almost unnatural. The fourth rule pulsed in my memory with sudden urgency. If any employee exits the walk-in freezer after 2 a.m., immediately ask them the temperature reading inside. "What was the temperature reading in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jack stared at me for several seconds without responding. His glassy eyes seemed to be processing the question from a great distance. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that same flat, emotionless tone. 0 degrees Celsius. The wrong answer hit me like ice water. Not -2 degrees, 0 degrees Celsius. According to the rule, that meant I needed to run to my car, drive away, and call Ryan once I was safe. No hesitation, no questions, no trying to figure out what was happening or why Jack had given the wrong temperature. But looking at him standing there, pale and disoriented, but still recognizably the same person who'd been helping me all night, running away felt like an overreaction. Maybe he was just confused or had misread the gauge. Maybe the cold had affected his thinking, or he'd been distracted by whatever mechanical problem had caused the banging sounds. Then Jack smiled, and every doubt disappeared. It wasn't his smile. The expression used his mouth and teeth, but something fundamental was wrong with the way it formed. Too wide, too empty, like someone had described smiling to him, but he'd never actually seen it done. I ran. No conscious decision, no weighing of options. My body reacted to that wrong smile with pure instinct, turning toward the front door and moving as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard Jack's voice calling my name, but it no longer sounded human. The tone was too deep, with harmonics that shouldn't exist in any throat designed for human speech. My hands shook as I fumbled with the door handle, expecting to feel Jack's hand grab my shoulder at any second. The bell jingled frantically as I shoved through the entrance and sprinted toward my car. Something large crashed through the kitchen area behind me. Not the sound of a person knocking over equipment, but the sound of something much heavier and less careful moving through space designed for human proportions. I reached my car and threw myself into the driver's seat, fingers struggling with the keys while keeping my eyes on the restaurant's windows. Through the fluorescent-lit glass, I could see shadows moving in the kitchen area, shapes that didn't match what I remembered of Jack's build or the way he'd moved earlier. The engine turned over on the second try. I was about to put the car in reverse when headlights swept across the parking lot from the highway. Ryan's truck pulled in next to mine, and he climbed out with the same purposeful stride I'd seen when the elderly man and boy had triggered rule number 3. "Stay in your car," he called out to me, then walked toward the restaurant entrance without waiting for a response. He pushed through the front door like he was arriving for a normal shift, not walking into whatever had replaced Jack in that kitchen. Through the windows, I watched him disappear from view as he moved toward the back of the restaurant. Then the real sounds started. What came from inside the building over the next 20 minutes defied easy description. Crashes and impacts that shook the windows. Something that might have been screaming but pitched too low and sustained too long for human lungs. The fluorescent lights blinked repeatedly, making strange shadows across the dining area. I sat in my car with the engine running, ready to drive away if whatever was happening inside came looking for me. But Ryan had told me to stay, and so far following instructions had kept me alive through encounters I never could have navigated on my own. The violent sounds reached a peak that made me consider driving away, regardless of Ryan's instructions. Then everything went quiet. The silence stretched for several minutes before Ryan came out through the front door. He walked like he was exhausted and his uniform had dark stains on it. But he was walking on his own and seemed okay. He approached my car and gestured for me to roll down the window. "Everything's taken care of," he said, his voice carrying the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used when discussing the rules during my interview. "You can head home for the night." "What happened to Jack?" Ryan leaned against the car door, looking back toward the restaurant with an expression of mild frustration rather than horror or grief. What came out of that freezer wasn't Jack anymore. Hadn't been Jack for a while, probably. These things are good at mimicking behavior for short periods, but they can't maintain it indefinitely. Things. The real Jack went missing 3 days ago. What you've been working with tonight was something else wearing his face. Ryan straightened up and checked his watch. "Your new coworker starts tomorrow night. Different person, same job requirements." The casual way he delivered this information felt more unsettling than the violent sounds that had come from the kitchen. How often does this happen? Ryan considered the question like he was calculating routine maintenance schedules rather than discussing supernatural murder. Often enough that we have procedures for it. Not so often that it becomes predictable. He gestured toward the restaurant, where normal fluorescent lighting now illuminated an apparently normal dining area. Part of why the job pays what it does. Part of why most people don't last. I thought about Jack's helpful attitude all evening, his careful explanations of procedures and safety protocols, the way he'd moved with practiced confidence around equipment and locations he'd known for over 2 years. How much of that had been real memory versus whatever had killed him learning to mimic his behavior? "The temperature reading," I said. "Why did it give the wrong answer?" "Because it's not human, and human knowledge doesn't come naturally to it. It can copy surface behaviors for a while, but details like specific numbers or procedures require genuine understanding." Ryan pushed away from the car. "The rules exist because we've learned to identify when something's wrong, usually in time to save the people who follow them." He headed back toward the restaurant, then paused and looked over his shoulder. "You handled that exactly right tonight, Michael. Most new employees try to rationalize what they're seeing or convince themselves it's not really dangerous. That kind of thinking gets people killed." Ryan disappeared back into the building, presumably to handle whatever cleanup was required when something inhuman had been wearing a missing employee's face. I sat in my car for several more minutes, processing what had just happened and what it meant for tomorrow night. I drove home through the desert darkness, wondering what my new coworker would be like and whether I'd be able to tell if something similar happened to them. I made it about 5 miles down Highway 50 before headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, gaining fast. My first thought was that whatever had been wearing Jack's face had somehow survived Ryan's intervention and was coming after me. But the vehicle that pulled alongside my car was Ryan's truck, and he was gesturing for me to pull over. I eased onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. Ryan parked behind me and walked to my driver's side window, his uniform still showing those dark stains from whatever had happened in the kitchen. "Follow me back to town," he said. "We need to talk, and you shouldn't be driving alone right now. Not until you've had time to process what you just saw." The ride to my apartment complex took 40 minutes, Ryan's headlights steady in my rearview mirror as we drove through the pre-dawn darkness. My hands had stopped shaking by the time we reached the outskirts of Ely, but my mind kept replaying that wrong smile Jack had given me before I ran. The way his voice had changed when he called my name. The sounds that had come from the kitchen while Ryan dealt with whatever Jack had become. Ryan parked next to me in the visitors section and followed me up the exterior stairs to my second-floor unit. I unlocked the door and let him into my small living room, suddenly aware of how shabby the place looked with its second-hand furniture and bare walls. The contrast between my desperate living situation and the supernatural crisis I'd just escaped felt surreal. Ryan settled into my ancient armchair like he had all the time in the world. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure," I said honestly, taking the couch across from him. "I keep thinking about how normal Jack seemed all night, how helpful he was. If you hadn't told me he'd been missing for 3 days, I never would have known." "That's what makes them dangerous. They're excellent mimics for short periods. They study their targets, learn behavioral patterns, replicate speech patterns and mannerisms." Ryan leaned forward, his expression serious. "But they can't maintain perfect impersonation indefinitely. Eventually, the cracks show. Like giving the wrong temperature reading. Exactly. They can copy surface behaviors, but they don't understand why humans do specific things or remember specific details. The rules exploit those limitations." I thought about the careful way Jack had moved after coming out of the freezer, the flat tone in his voice, that horrifying smile. Signs I'd noticed but tried to rationalize away. "How long has this been going on?" Ryan was quiet for a moment, thinking about what to say. "The restaurant has been a containment site for 12 years. Before that, it was just a normal diner that happened to be built in the wrong place. Weird things happened sometimes, but nobody saw the pattern or knew what to do. People died. A lot of people. Containment facility? The location attracts them. Something about the geography, the isolation, the intersection of travel routes. We don't fully understand why, but entities that shouldn't exist in our world are drawn to that spot. The restaurant gives us a controlled environment to manage encounters safely." Ryan gestured toward the window, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "The isolation isn't accidental. It's a buffer zone. When something dangerous appears, it shows up there instead of in populated areas where innocent people could be hurt." The weight of what he was telling me settled over me slowly. This wasn't just a weird job with unusual customers. It was actively dangerous work that served a genuine purpose. "The rules aren't arbitrary workplace policies," Ryan continued. "They're carefully developed protocols based on 12 years of trial and error. Each one represents a specific type of encounter we've learned to identify and manage. Each one was written because someone died learning what happens when you handle the situation incorrectly." I remembered his words from the night before about rules being written in blood. 14 employees in 2 years suddenly made more sense in this context. Why are you telling me this now instead of during the interview? Because most people can't handle it, Ryan said simply. If I explained the real nature of the work up front, I'd never find anyone willing to take the job. But if someone can survive their first shift by following the rules exactly, they might be able to handle the truth and make an informed decision about continuing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Which brings me to why I'm here. You have a choice to make. Ryan placed the envelope on my coffee table. If you decide this job isn't for you, that envelope contains enough money to cover 3 months of expenses while you find other employment. No questions asked, no hard feelings. You walk away and never think about Desert Oasis Diner again. I looked at the envelope. It was a kind offer, but I was so broke that walking away seemed impossible. And if I choose to continue? Then you work with full knowledge of what you're dealing with. You understand that every shift carries real risks, but also that the work serves an important purpose. The entities that appear at our location would cause unimaginable damage if they reach cities or towns. We're not just serving food to travelers. We're preventing supernatural disasters from affecting innocent people. Ryan stood up, checking his watch. Take the day to think about it. If you decide to continue, be at the restaurant by 10 tonight. If not, consider the envelope a severance payment and find a safer way to make a living. After he left, I sat on my couch staring at the envelope for a long time. The smart thing would be to take the money and run. Find some other job, maybe not one that paid as well, but something that wouldn't require me to distinguish between real employees and things wearing their faces. But Ryan's words about preventing supernatural disasters kept playing in my mind. If these things really were drawn to that location, and if the restaurant really did serve as a buffer between dangerous encounters and populated areas, then walking away felt like abandoning something genuinely important. I opened the envelope. The cash inside would indeed cover 3 months of basic expenses, maybe 4 if I was careful. More than enough time to find other work and get back on my feet. I spent the day trying to convince myself to take the money and disappear. I walked around Ely, looking at other businesses where I might apply for normal jobs with normal risks. I checked my bank account and calculated how long the severance would last. I thought about Jack's helpful attitude all night, and what it meant that something not human had been copying him so perfectly. But I also thought about the blue baseball cap customer's blank stare, the trucker who'd known exactly what to ask for, the elderly man and boy whose ages had added up to something that required immediate action. I thought about Ryan's calm handling of situations that would have left me completely helpless. The work was dangerous, but it was also necessary. I was still alive because I'd followed the rules exactly. By evening, I had made my decision. I put on my uniform shirt and name tag, checked that the rules were still in my jacket pocket, and drove back toward Highway 50. The restaurant appeared in my headlights exactly as it had 24 hours earlier, with bright fluorescent lights shining on the empty parking lot. Ryan was waiting behind the counter when I walked through the front door, and his face showed what looked like real respect when he saw me. Most new employees quit after their first supernatural encounter, he said. The ones who come back usually last longer than a few weeks. Usually? Nothing's guaranteed in this job, but you've proven you can follow instructions when your survival depends on it, and you can make rational decisions under pressure. Those are the most important qualifications. Ryan pointed to the kitchen area where everything looked normal and clean, with no sign of the violence that happened hours earlier. Your new coworker starts tonight. Her name is Sarah Chen, and she's been doing this work for 8 months. She knows what she's dealing with. I felt scared but also kind of proud as I got ready for my second night. The money was good, the work was important, and I'd already made it through one shift by following the rules instead of my gut feelings. Ryan gave me a fresh copy of the 5 rules, even though I still knew them by heart. Same procedures as last night. Stay just as alert. The entities don't stop coming just because you've seen them before.